What hobby in men gives you green flag vibes? Story 1. My husband's hobby is making firewood. The entire process is his jam. Cutting down deadfall, bucking it up, carting it home, splitting it, stacking it, showing off immense wood piles to anyone who will listen, burning it. It's cheap and actually saves us money every month on heating. I grew up way out in the sticks, like a mile-long driveway in the middle of nowhere on a farm. One thing I found I missed when I moved out on my own, in a strange way, was splitting wood. As I got older, I moved close to a major city for work and relationship reasons, but still split some wood for fun when I visit my parents from time to time. When my mother was alive, her house sat on 5 acres of 95% woodland. She only had enough cleared for a driveway, septic, and a pool. Every year at Thanksgiving, my husband and I would visit and chop, split, and stack as much wood as possible for her during our 2-week vacation. I was not thrilled because we never went anywhere else during vacation. He loved it. But I loved, and still love, the smell of the wood stove and its fantastic warmth. I don't miss the manual labor, though. My ex was a carpenter, and would get so excited when he'd see wood fallen that people didn't want. I loved a good storm. He'd call his buddies and scoop them up and go grab it and come home and chop and stack for hours. He'd make his niece stack it, telling her it'd give her character and put hair on her chest. She hated it. I don't want hair on my chest. But it's a good memory now, lol. Sadly, was one of his only 2 redeeming qualities. A couple of years back, I was in the yard making firewood out of some trees I had cut down. No splitter, just hacking away with an axe. I pause for a second and look up at the window to see my wife with an intense stare and a smirk. Okay, that's weird. I put my head down and get back to it. Come in like an hour later to get water and she pounces on me. Turns out the whole lumberjack vibe is a thing for her. I now have a couple of tree service companies that will drop their rounds off to me. Story 2. I knew someone in college whose hobby was restoring old books, like classics he found in Goodwill, or that had been handed down and were well loved. He would repair the glue, trim down the weathered edges of the pages, etc. My mind was blown, and to this day, I wish I had talked to him more about it. Dodged a bullet. I imagine he spent his days like this. I notice you observing me with my books. The way I put them back together, the way I trim down the weathered edges. I'm good at fixing things. I know you're right in the middle of a nasty breakup. I could trim down your weathered edges. He never deserved you, but I don't want to scare you away. No, I have to be careful. Take it slowly when I run my hands down the spine. As I finish, I see the longing in your eyes. You wish it was your spine as I finish. One time I rebooked a first edition of J.R.R. Tolkien's Hobbit using a leather cover and gold foil. The guy on Antiques Roadshow told me in the original condition that book was worth $80,000. With my new beautiful handcrafted cover, it was worth $32. Story 3. Any hobby that a man isn't ashamed to do because it isn't manly. For example, my husband is a very burly man with his hands. Manly man, but every night sits down and makes quilts with me. He even has made a few of his own. I do cross-stitch. I'm a dude. When I worked in the service industry, I'd sometimes do it on my breaks. The other guys would give me crap. The women were much friendlier. Your male colleagues. He's not manly. Your female colleagues. He's secure enough in his masculinity that he doesn't need to perform machismo. He's a good one. Many years ago in a different job, my work colleague who sat next to me got crap from another colleague for doing something effeminate. I can't even remember what it was. Either way, before my colleague could respond, I piped up, "You think you're mocking him, but X is perfectly comfortable with who he is. He is a modern man free of toxic masculinity." Later, he said that it was the nicest thing anyone has ever said about him. Fast forward to today, and he and his wife are best friends with me and my husband. Comments like that stick with you as a man. A few years ago at a party, I drunkenly sang along to one of the girly songs and got a few ha-has from the guys there. One of the girls immediately replied to one of the comments with, "He just doesn't have to show off how manly he is." It's been 5 years, and it still randomly pops into my head and gives me confidence to do whatever the hell I want to do. It's true. Most women roll their eyes at all the clearly compensatory manly stuff, and appreciate men who don't treat girly things with contempt. Why would we want to be with a partner who thinks everything associated with our gender is weak and worthy of mockery? And what does it say about a man that his entire sense of self can be threatened by singing a particular karaoke song? Story 4. Gardening and caring for pets or small animals. My husband just bought an MHC, which I've been told stands for Madagascar hissing cockroach, into the house. Long story, but he had always wanted one, and the thing basically popped out of someone's laptop into his arms. I was not happy at first, but after seeing how he cares for even the most disgusting animal you can imagine, it just confirms that the man is all love and kindness. So we named her Cookie, and I will admit I'm starting to feel some affection for her. I just asked my girlfriend, and she said when we first started dating she found my interest in fish keeping / aquascaping quirky. To her credit, she is very gracious about showing interest in my new fish when I buy them. And she mostly enjoys my interest in gardening because she gets to eat what I grow, so I'm not sure just how green these flags are, to be honest. Tell that to my abusive ex. Gardening and raising animals and children were some of the things we had in common. Unfortunately, it turned out that he didn't want a partner to share his life with. He wanted a woman to own and rule over. He used gross language that sounded more like a father to a daughter than a husband to a wife. I'm already grown, thanks. I don't need anyone raising me or policing my actions or opinions or thoughts. Story 5. Having plants that are actually well cared for. I dated a man who had an entire tree in his home, in a pot. He'd had it for decades. It was named Tree, and he loved it. I would talk to it and gently touch it while he made his breakfast. I figured if Tree was important to him, I would form a relationship with it. It was a good tree. Nothing speaks to my male soul quite so much as meticulously caring for something for decades and naming it Tree. We are shockingly simple creatures by nature. My ball python's legal name is Anders, but it took me like 3 weeks to figure that out, so now he mostly just goes by Snake, Little Dude, Little Homie, or if he's on a hunger strike, Babe. The little scaly no-leg nuisance wasted another life, as I carried a poor thawed mouse out to the compost. My wife was telling a story from work. All these girls were gabbing after one got flowers delivered. They were all bragging about how often they get flowers. My wife chirps in and says I converted a part of our lawn to a wildflower pasture, and I pick her bouquets about once a week, from May through November. One of the guys said I was making them all look bad. Even if the wildflowers and stuff, like the strawberries, counted as one, I wouldn't be able to tell you how many plants I have, lol. I'm building a green oasis. Story 6. My girlfriend says it's a green flag that I support mediocre sports teams and have fun watching them even when they lose, which is pretty often. My girlfriend once complimented how I can be patient with her. I replied, I've been putting up with Leeds crap for 15 years. Yours is easy in comparison. She didn't find it as funny as I did. Unironically, yes, sports can be a good way of noticing anger issues in a casual acquaintance that could turn into a real problem if you were to date. They're commonly talked about in social settings, and some people get really unhealthily worked up about it. I'm a Chicago Bears fan, and one Sunday this year, as they were about to play the Broncos, my wife asked who was on the schedule. The Bears hadn't won a game at that point in the season. She asked if I'd ever thought about jumping ship, and I said no. She goes, "You know how I know you'll never leave me? My wife grew up a lifelong season ticket Chargers fan, and her dad would be insufferable with every loss till the next week when it all started over. She vowed she would never allow sports to impact her life because of it. Somehow we started dating, and my team was in the Super Bowl, and I brought her over to my dad's house to watch with the family. She said she had to keep her by halftime because they were losing their mind, just nonstop anxiety, where I just hung out and was more worried about the wings I was in charge of. This is not to say I don't love the team as much as my family, I just don't let it ruin my moment. She still questions the amount of money I spend every year on sports packages, but because I'm mellow, she doesn't complain." Story 7. In one sentence, take care of another living entity, be it plants, pets, or peers. 100% how I landed my wife. I came from out of town to help a friend and his wife who were having a baby by cooking and cleaning for the last week of the pregnancy. They dragged me over to a friend's place who had invited them over. The hostess is now my wife after I approved of her library. For me, I met my wife while I was out of town, so we decided she'd come visit me like 1 month after we met. The very day she was supposed to come to me, I had crashed my motorcycle really badly, so I was hospitalized for a few weeks, intensive care for 2 weeks. My mother had to call my now wife and tell her that she couldn't come. She basically called me every day and was the light of my day since I was stuck in that rectangle of a bed I was in. One particular time, which I also retold on our wedding, was when doctors were doing the rounds after I had surgery on my non-broken leg, thanks to a late discovery of compression syndrome, when you bleed internally and the muscles build up pressure and slowly strangle themselves to death. So we had the surgery, and then the doctors did the rounds like 2 days after. They asked if I was still in pain, and when I said yes, they looked kinda worried. So they started looking up some stuff, and it turns out that they had only opened 3/4 valves in my leg, and my pain would most likely be due to that 4th valve still bleeding. I asked if they could open it up again and fix it, but it was too late, so I asked what that would mean. They said that it will either heal by itself or it will develop into chronic pain. Then the doctor just walked off, left me all alone in that damned rectangle, stuck thinking about how my life was over and how I'd feel this pain forever. At that very moment, my wife called. I just broke down and she got a bit awkward and asked if she called at the wrong time, but I assured her she called at the exact right time, the time I needed her the most. A few months later, she was able to come and push me around in a wheelchair. She even pushed me down into a pothole while distracted by an ugly building, causing me to nearly stand on my broken leg. She was my rock through some of the hardest points of my life, and she cared for me. I will never be able to repay it, but I will forever love her with all my heart. She is fantastic, and I couldn't wish for a better partner. Story 8. If he has pets and cares about them, truly, it is such a green flag. A fairly significant reason why I married my husband was how devoted he was to his cat. She spent her first couple of years living in a woodpile in West Virginia and was not particularly cuddly or easy to love, but she was his princess. Unsurprisingly, he is an 11 out of 10 husband and dad, so that was a good call. If the pet is a cat, it's a whole new level of green flag. Every guy I know who owns a cat and cares for them is usually the best guy. If he randomly says he hates cats, it's usually signifying something bad deeper. Double-edged sword. Triple-edged even. I keep pet rats. Can be a turn-off at first, and if a girl's not open-minded about them, I take that as a yellow flag. But when they get past the fact that they are rats and realize how cute and friendly and loving they can be, they are 100% into it, and into me. Unfortunately, rats are also really prone to illness and have very short lifespans, 2 to 3 years. And I've sent more than one girl home early because one of my rats was having respiratory issues, and I needed to be there for them if they took a turn for the worse. Triple-edged sword. Improbable enough. Unless they overdo it. I'm still not over that guy I met a bit over 10 years ago. After a first meetup for coffee that had gone all right, he had invited me to his. His exact phrasing was, "Wanna come over for dinner?" So when I arrived, he was busy in the kitchen. That makes sense, right? Wrong. He proudly carries out a plate with a steak and rice and sets it down in front of his dog before offering me yesterday's cold pizza. Then he goes on to explain to me that his dog would never taste dog food, how he doesn't really cook for himself much, but he always cooks for the dog, and whatnot. He also told me that he goes on walks with the dog for 6 to 8 hours a day. Oh, and that he had 2 broken ribs because the dog had jumped on him the night before. But see, he didn't need to see a doctor because, that happens a lot. Now, hear me right, the steak had 0 spices, was directly bought from a butcher, and was certified from a free-roaming cow. The dog was healthy, happy, and well-behaved. Didn't pull, didn't bark, didn't jump up, didn't even try to get on the couch or anything. It was a big breed, so insanely long walks are really the optimal way for things to go. The guy, though? Teeth weren't good. Clothes were ragged. Skin and hair were flaky and unhealthily matted, and the amount of junk food wrappers at his place was insane. AKA self-care was nowhere on his agenda whatsoever. This guy had built his whole life around this dog, and I dread to think how that story ended. I noped out right after that dinner for obvious reasons. Story 9. I've never met him in person, but if I ever met a man, friend, family, in-law, doesn't matter, and he has a basement room with the whole Lionel train setup and Faux City, I'd be all over it. Please let me watch, help, and set up. Heck, I'll even dust and help clean it. I would find it utterly enchanting. Model train guy here. Quick story. First Christmas Eve I spent with now wife, then girlfriend, and parents. After dinner, her dad and I started talking cars and then trains, and I told him how I, as a kid, loved model trains, and my parents couldn't afford it. So I only looked through the hobby shop window wishing I could have this one train in particular, but it was $1,000 in 1989. He runs to the basement and comes back with this big dusty red Lionel box with a box of tracks and a power transformer. And to my surprise, it was the Blue Comet. My face dropped like I was 9 years old again. We spent all night running that train. Anyway, 7 years later, our basement is now a giant train layout, and we have built and rebuilt a few times as a family. Also, not everyone who's into model trains is a good person. The toxicity in model train clubs is childish, seeing grown men fistfight over who gets to do what on a layout. You might look into joining a model train club. They have their own setups and are super friendly groups that would welcome any interest. My dad was a member. It was really cool to see a whole room set up and watch them run the trains. I think nowadays, guys who would have become train guys are funneled into various kinds of city builder video games, city skylines, and the like. I've probably become a train guy myself, but having several games that essentially do the same thing without limits, except on pixels, is plenty good enough to scratch that itch. So I have to say, this isn't always a green flag. Growing up, had a friend whose dad put together a whole setup for trains, multi-level, multiple animated electric-based cars that interacted, lumber trains, milk jugs, etc. Yep, O-gauge. It was pretty cool stuff. Had 2 trains that would run on different tracks at once. It was a great setup, and I always enjoyed seeing it run. He must have had at least $20K in 1980s money invested in trains alone, where he had entire matching engines, cars, etc. Even had entire trains that were displayed on tracks around the basement to show off all the trains he had. It was the best example of a train layout from the friends I had that I knew of. But that's where things end. Long story short, he was an abusive, verbally, male-chauvinistic asshole who put his wife down constantly. So much so it rubbed off on his son, my friend, to the point that it made him also a womanizing asshole. Found out a few years ago that the son was caught in some sort of sex sting situation with an underage girl, and well, I can only imagine what happened from that. So be forewarned, not every train guy is what they seem. Story 10. The first time my boyfriend came over to my place, we'd only been going out with each other for a couple of weeks. The cat came sprinting down the hallway to investigate who this stupid new human invader was, and how dare I not alert him to his presence. Cat skids to a halt, gets scooped up, and was fussed over for a good half hour or so. That is a major green flag, that they love animals. Not so much when they then bloody ignore you for 10 minutes every night when they get home from work to fuss over the feline overlord and tell them all about his day. The very first time my now husband, Ken, came over to my apartment, he and my cat bonded like they were soulmates. My cat has been a cranky old man since the day he was born. He hates new people in his home and will generally spend the entire time rage hiding in the closet. He especially dislikes men, for unknown reasons, because I've had the little bastard since he was 4 weeks old and he's never been mistreated by a man. I walk in the door, followed by Ken. The cat appeared out of nowhere and instantly latched himself onto Ken like they were old college buddies who hadn't seen each other in years. We obviously had no choice but to begin a serious relationship and ultimately get married. My cat, who I raised since before he should have been separated from his mother, who I have loved and cared for 15 years, would push me into a wood chipper if he thought it would get him more snuggles from my husband. This is my girl Cake to a T. She's a former dumpster cat who took a year to snuggle me after I adopted her. In the first 2 years of having her, I came away with 3 finger infections from bites, including one that almost needed surgery. My now husband shows up and it's like she met her soulmate. She can now be found snuggled up to him every day. She even rubs her dumb little kitty face on his face. I love them both so much, but I'm still salty after 6 years of this. My wife had a cat like that. It wasn't a thing against men specifically, but her cat, Lola, would almost telepathically know how she felt about a dude. My wife has a friend who's always been in love with her, but she didn't feel the same way, and when he came over, Lola hated him. Same with me to an extent. My wife has been one of my best friends since we were 15, and when we first tried dating around 26 years old, 2012, Lola and I got along, because animals usually like me, but were a bit standoffish. After we finally figured out how to make it work and got back together for good in 2019, Lola was my buddy. She had a reputation and couldn't be seen as cuddly when 2 or more humans were in the room, but every day before work she'd ask to be picked up and would start purring in my arms, and then would rub the top of her head against my beard. She was a feisty, sweet girl and I miss her. She passed away 2 Christmases ago. Story 11. Actually read or well-versed in a topic that comes from genuine interest and not egotistical gain. Sexy, attractive, whatever. I'm a straight guy, and though I may not care about the topic, I'll be under a spell if I listen to someone rambling about something they're genuinely passionate about. That's when our natural human magnetism comes in. It's awesome. I manage people for a living, so I need to have lots of small conversations and try to find ways to get to know people at work to show I care about them, and I don't take them for granted. I love discovering something about a person that they care about, especially because Reddit over the years has given me a shallow knowledge about so many different topics and hobbies that I can usually use that to work in a good question or respond in a way that shows I care and am interested in what they have to say. All of the random stuff I've read here genuinely helps me, which is nice, and something I never thought would be the case. I'm of the opinion that everyone should have at least one thing that they're oddly enthusiastic about. It doesn't matter what that one thing is. Sports, space travel, books, electronics, sewing, history, etc. Anything goes so long as you're both willing and able to talk about that topic at length to anyone interested in listening. If you're not weirdly knowledgeable about something, then what do you have, really? Story 12. There is a man in my city in his 60s who volunteers at a local hospital NICU to hug and rock the premature babies. I thought NICU babies are in incubators most of the time or are handled by fiercely protective NICU nurses. I'm not sure that strangers can just go and get a hold of them. One of my favorite nursing school rotations was the NICU. I don't think I could ever work there myself, but I spent 8 hours sitting in a recliner cuddling a baby who was born a month early and addicted to drugs because his mother was taking them her entire pregnancy. He had such a shrill cry, and as soon as he was held, he was so content and relaxed. I held my bladder for the last 3.5 hours of that rotation because I didn't want to have to put him down to go to the bathroom. I hope that little guy is doing well now. That whole unit broke my heart for those babies, and for the parents who were there who didn't do anything wrong, but just had unfortunate circumstances. I do this. I'm 64 and male, married to the love of my life who is a nurse. Great way to spend a day, but a tad heartbreaking at times. I was a preemie in the age where they threw you in an isolate, gave you some oxygen, and if you failed to thrive, you didn't. God bless. Still haven't had a nurse hit on me though, looking like a buffed 55-year-old. That's okay too. Story 13. Carpentry. Dude here who does dude stuff and knows dudes who do dude stuff. Hobby carpenters are generally very reliable and have their crap together type of people. They also tend to be perfectionists, and things typically need to be done their way because they know the best way. So there are some pros and cons there, depending on what type of person you can deal with. Hobby carpenter here. The only reason I'm so anal about doing it my way is because that's the only way I know how to do it. I'm pleased that we give off this air of credibility. I honestly recommend woodworking to anyone seeking a hobby. It's super tactile. Planing and sanding wood is such a centering experience. It's a great mindfulness exercise, and it can be easy to get into, especially if you're willing to clean up secondhand tools. A couple of chisels and a saw is all you need to get started, or buy a pocket hole jig and build anything from Anna White. My husband is a carpenter who works building custom homes, and he's absolutely awesome and has finally, in our relationship after 2 failed marriages, figured out how to be a great partner and how to do the hard work on both himself and the relationship that is required for relationships to be successful. I'm doing the work as well, and we're learning and growing together, and it's awesome. However, literally all the other carpenters he works with are not very good at relationships, or at many things in life, including not being alcoholics, staying out of trouble, and taking care of their physical and mental health. Maybe it's just his crew, or maybe it's the kind of people attracted to this job. So I wouldn't say being a carpenter is a green flag at all. I just got lucky, I believe. Story 14. I dated a woman for a few months who told me that a man owning a cat was a red flag for her. I had a cat that she knew about from day one. So I said, I guess I'm not man enough to carry your baggage, or something to that effect. That was the last time I saw her. Me and my little orange buddy were happy to get rid of that psycho. Honestly, the moment when someone tries to tell me about what's manly and what's not manly, I usually hit them with the combo of, I'm a grown-ass man, I can do whatever the hell I want. If you have a problem with it, do something. I dated a girl who said her nephew is not allowed to watch Frozen because it'll turn him gay. People say anything, doesn't mean it's true. If anything, it helps filter themselves out of your life so you can find someone better. Hell, I'd say a man not owning or liking cats is a red flag. I dated a guy who was severely allergic to cats, and he still loved them. One time, we went over to a friend's house for dinner and he spent the entire time playing with their 2 kittens. When we left, I wanted to take him to the hospital because of how rashy he was. I've had 2 girlfriends who resented my cat, who was the coolest, friendliest, and most handsome cat. The first would ask, "How long is he gonna live?" He would try to cuddle with us on the sofa and she just saw him as a nuisance. That was Lola. The second girlfriend, she once jokingly said something about meat, like he had a lot of meat on him, and if she only had a knife. When we broke up, she left a note on my wall, "You're gonna die alone with your cats." That was Triana. I have since assumed all women like dogs and hate cats. Story 15. Not a woman, nor a gay man, but I'd say most hobbies are green flags or no flags. A friend of mine really loves Microsoft Excel. He watched the Excel World Tournament. He wrote a rap about Excel and we spent some nights finding beats for it and practicing it. Anyway, women have told him that it's not that he likes Excel, it's that he's passionate in the first place, that they find sexy. Personally, I think it's because he's 6'4" and full of muscle, but sure, it's because he's passionate too. I'm a woman, and this isn't sarcastic or trolling. I like to see what you think of my hobbies. I collect radioactive stuff, mostly Vaseline or uranium glass. I just got a clock, think radium girls. That makes my Geiger counter scream. My hobby freaks a lot of people out, lol. It's mostly harmless. It's fun turning on black lights and watching the majority stuff I have glow radioactive bright green. I really love the history of it. I have a notebook where I keep track of when, where, and who made each thing. Also, I forgot to add, I used to grow a poisonous/toxic garden separate from my main garden/plants. My grandmother did the same when she was alive and I developed a love for those plants from her. I've stopped until my kid is old enough to understand not to mess with it. My grandmother loved the history of plant-based toxins and poisons. The radioactive stuff is really cool, and the toxic plants hobby is cool, but I would always be in the back of my mind to keep an eye out for any additional red flags associated with the fact that when women murder people, especially those close to them, they overwhelmingly prefer poison. So the toxic plants hobby isn't a red flag in and of itself, but in conjunction with certain other behaviors, it would be. Story 16. It's about balance. A man who, let's say, golfs, but not every single weekend. Loves live music, but doesn't live in a bar. Watches sports, but not attached to the couch. Being active and open to learning new things. Extra points for being handy. That's hot. I'm a dude, so my 2 cents don't matter here, but gonna back this up. I used to make hobbies my identity. Like I thought I was the most badass rock climber for 20 years. Never talked to my non-climbing friends again. Dated only climbers. Held back my career, etc. I cringe thinking about it. I still enjoy climbing and many other hobbies now, but no single one will be my identity ever again. Story 17. So it looks like the top 3 are books, pets, and gardening, and carpentry, i.e. desire to make yourself better, desire to nurture and take care of others, and life skills. Gentlemen, your weekend project, build a bookshelf and stock it with lots of books on pets, gardening, and DIY skills. Pro tip, buy used books so it looks like you've actually read them. By the way, this list is pretty accurate. I asked my wife and she was quite impressed that I had built a bookshelf, and that I could cook a meal during our 3rd date. Story 18. Enjoying nature. I was in a long-term abusive relationship and he made me get rid of the dog both times I tried to add one to our life. Didn't care about watching birds with me, didn't care to help with any landscaping stuff. I'm now 1 year into a wonderful romance with a man who has outdoor hobbies, watches baby animal videos on YouTube and just bought a house, and is delighted in watching birds show up to the feeders he put up. I can share my nature with him and it's fantastic. The dog thing is kinda complicated because there are genuine legit reasons people don't want dogs in the house. I feel like if my girlfriend got a dog, as long as she cleaned up after it and walked it, I'd be fine with it. Of course, I'd want to walk it and play with it and train it and stuff with her, but I'd probably be too busy to do that all of the time. Story 19. Most of them. Certainly staying within the budget is necessary. In a relationship, that's usually where friction comes from, if there is any. Balancing your hobbies with relationship time is important as well. Sure, talk all about your book, your film, your woodworking, but don't forget there are other topics. A man who can entertain and enrich himself is a jewel among men. It adds to the relationship. It helps a man with his emotional and mental health. Collect coins, go backpacking, watch the stars, support your team, dig in the garden, get greasy in the garage. raise rabbits, foster cats, learn a foreign language, bake, and volunteer to teach old folks how to use tech. Be happy. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story to these that you would like to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.